A blind girl screams into a raging storm. Will the dark save her or bury her forever? The storm tore across the plains with a fury Ellie had only dreamed of in the shadowy corners of her mind, born from her mother's fireside tales. The wind howled like a living thing, wild and unstoppable, shaking the earth beneath her feet. Thunder rolled deep and loud, like war drums pounding in a battle she couldn't see, each boom swallowed by the storm's endless roar. The wagons creaked and groaned, their wooden frames trembling under the onslaught, rattling like bones about to break. The rain crashed down in waves, cold and sharp, slicing through the night like 1,000 icy needles. It hammered against the wood and soaked through the canvas, dripping onto Ellie's hands, her face, her hair, chilling her to the core. She clung to the rough wooden edge of the wagon, her knuckles whitening, her fingers slick with rain, slipping slightly as she fought to hold on. Every gust of wind screamed past her ears, fierce and deafening, twisting her stomach into a tight, clawing knot that wouldn't let go. Her breath hitched to her chest, coming in short, panicked gasps, her heart thumping so hard she thought it might burst. Fear gripped her, wild and overwhelming, clawing at her insides like an animal trapped in a cage. She pressed herself deeper into the corner of the wagon, her back against the hardwood, trying to shrink away from the flapping canvas and the vast, hungry night outside. The dark felt alive, pressing in, watching her. Her mother's voice had cut through the chaos just moments before, strained and breaking, sharp with desperation. "Ellie, stay with me," she'd yelled, her hand grabbing Ellie's shoulder, fingers digging in so hard it left a dull ache. Ellie could still feel the pressure, the bruising grip, but in her terror, she'd shrugged it off, pulling away, curling tighter into herself. Her mother's touch had been real, solid, but now it was gone, lost in the storm's fury. Then the horses screamed, high, piercing cries that sounded almost human, rearing up in panic. The wagon jolted violently, rocking hard, and Ellie lost her grip. She fell, tumbling across the splintered floor, her elbows scraping against the rough wood, her knees banging painfully. She rolled until her back slammed into the wheel well with a thud that stole her breath, leaving her gasping, dizzy, and bruised. She lay there for a moment, stunned, the storm's roar filling her ears like a relentless tide. Then silence. Not complete silence, but an eerie stillness that crept in, heavy and wrong. The voices were gone. No shouts from her mother, no gruff calls from her father, no creak of boots on the wagon floor. Just the storm's low, guttural rumble and the steady drip of rain on the canvas above. Ellie stretched her arms out slowly, her hands trembling as they reached into the dark, searching. Her fingers brushed wet wood, cold air, nothing else. "Ma," she whispered, her voice so small it barely reached her own ears, swallowed by the wind. "Pa." No answer came. Her chest tightened, her breath catching again. Her mother's voice, so clear just minutes ago, was gone, lost to the distance, the storm, the night. She couldn't hear the others either. No shouts, no rustling of movement. The world had narrowed to just her, the dark, and the frantic pounding of her own heart. She'd never been alone like this, not truly, not in a way that felt so final. The realization sank into her, cold and heavy, like a stone dropping into deep water. Her fingers shook harder as she pushed herself up, crawling inch by inch toward the wagon's edge. A sharp splinter stabbed into her palm, and she hissed, yanking her hand back. The sting was sharp, but she welcomed it. It was real, something solid in a world that felt like it was slipping away. She took a shaky breath, her chest still tight, and pulled herself closer to the edge. Her hands gripped the wet wood, feeling the grain under her fingertips, and she eased herself over the side. Her boots hit the ground with a wet squelch, sinking deep into the mud. She stumbled, nearly falling, the earth sucking at her feet as if it wanted to hold her there forever. She caught herself, standing unsteadily, the rain pounding her face, running down her cheeks, soaking her dress until it clung to her skin like a heavy, cold shroud. "Ma!" she called again, louder this time, her voice shaking, thin as a thread against the storm. "Pa? Anybody?" The rain answered instead, hammering harder, drumming against her shoulders, her head, her arms. She stood there, shivering, her body trembling from the cold and the fear. She tilted her head, straining her ears, trying to hear past the storm's noise. Every hair on her neck stood up, prickling as she listened. Rain, wind, the occasional roll of thunder. Was there a voice in there? A creak of a wheel? A footstep? The storm masked everything, blending danger and safety into one confusing blur. She took a step forward, her boots slipping on the slick ground, sending her staggering. She caught herself, heart racing, and tried again, planting her foot more firmly. The mud gripped her shoes, thick and stubborn, pulling at her with every move, anchoring her in place like a prisoner. Her chest heaved, breaths coming fast and shallow. They wouldn't leave me, she told herself, the thought repeating over and over in her mind like a prayer. They couldn't. Her mother's desperate grasp on her arm, her father's steady presence. They'd been real, hadn't they? She could still feel the echo of her mother's fingers, the way they'd clawed at her in the dark, trying to hold on. But what if the caravan had moved on without her? What if the wagons were rolling away right now, their wheels churning through the rain and mud, leaving her behind in this endless night? The idea shook her more deeply than the storm ever could, a fear so big it threatened to swallow her whole. "Ma!" she screamed, her voice raw, tearing out of her throat with a force that burned. "Pa!" The words broke apart, turning into sobs as she sank to her knees, the mud swallowing her hands, her legs. She clawed at the ground, her fingers sinking deep into the cold, wet earth, searching for something. Anything, solid, something that couldn't be taken away. The storm raged on, uncaring, its icy fingers seeping into her skin, mixing with her tears. She didn't know how long she stayed there, crumpled in Thea mud, her body shaking, her breath hitching. The wetness soaking into her wasn't just rain anymore. It was the chill of the night, the cold sting of being left behind, abandoned. Time blurred, slipping away like water through her fingers. She might have lain there for minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. Eventually, the storm began to weaken. The thunder faded to a low, distant mutter, grumbling like an old man too tired to shout. The rain softened, easing into a drizzle that tapped lightly against her shoulders, her hair, her hands. Her shivers grew worse, violent now, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She forced herself to her feet, her legs heavy as lead, unsteady and slow. Her hands brushed her soaked dress, feeling the weight of it pulling her down, but she stood anyway, swaying slightly. The air tasted different now, fresher, cleaner, carrying the sharp, green scent of pine through the fading storm. She tilted her head again, listening harder, her breath held tight in her chest. Then she heard it, a rustle, so faint she almost missed it, soft and careful, not the loud crash of a wagon or the heavy stomp of boots. She froze, her heart leaping. Them? Her family, coming back to find her? She wanted to believe it, wanted it so badly it hurt, but the sound was too quiet, too deliberate, not the frantic noise of search. Fear buzzed under her skin, sharp and electric, like a hive of angry bees waking up. She stumbled backward, her boot catching on a stone buried in the mud. Her arms flailed as she caught herself, her pulse hammering in her ears, loud and fast. Then she heard it, footsteps slow and steady, light as a cat stalking prey. Not her parents' clumsy, familiar strides, not anyone she knew. Her stomach twisted, a fresh wave of panic rising. "Who's there?" she cried, her voice cracking like brittle wood, sharp and desperate. "Please, I'm lost." The wind stirred the wet grass, rustling it softly, but no answer came. The silence stretched, long and tight, like a rope pulled to its limit. Then a voice broke through, deep, steady, each word carefully shaped, unfamiliar yet solid. "You are not alone." She spun toward it, her body stiff with terror, but beneath the fear, a tiny flicker of hope sparked to life. The voice was strange, rich with an accent she couldn't place, rolling over her like a wave, but it was human, and right now, that was enough. "Please," she whispered, her hands curling into tight fists, nails digging into her palms. "Can you help me?" The pause that followed was heavy, pressing against her chest. She waited, every muscle tense, every breath shallow. Then the voice came again, closer now, brushing against her senses like a shadow moving nearer. "You are far from your people." She nodded, the motion jerky, her head bobbing fast. "Yes, sigh. The storm, they're gone. I can't find them." The words spilled out, raw and trembling, tripping over each other in her rush to explain. "Are they looking for me?" She wondered, the question gnawing at her. "Or did they give up? Leave me to the dark?" The stranger didn't answer right away. His presence loomed in the darkness, solid and real, but unsettling too, like a weight she couldn't shake. When he spoke again, his words fell like stones, heavy and deliberate, sinking into her. "The land is harsh. Alone, you will not survive." The truth of it hit her hard, a blow she couldn't dodge. She fought against it, her fists clenching tighter, her nails drawing tiny pricks of pain in her palms. "I'll find them," she said, her voice shaking but stubborn. "Or they'll find me. They have to." A faint rustle broke the silence. Movement close, too close. Then a hand gripped her arm, firm and strong, the skin rough with calluses that scratched against her wet sleeve. She gasped, her head jerking toward the touch, her breath catching in her throat. "You are blind," he said, his voice flat, not a question but a fact he'd already seen. She swallowed hard, the word hanging there between them, heavy and exposed. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She braced herself for pity, for the softening tone people always used, the way they'd talk down to her like she was broken. But his voice didn't soften. It shifted, carrying a different weight, something harder, more real. "Blindness isn't weakness. Alone, it's danger." Her throat tightened, closing up around the truth she couldn't argue with. Her body betrayed her, her hands trembling, her teeth chattering, her legs weak from the cold and the mud sucking at her boots. She was vulnerable, exposed, and she hated it. "What will you do?" she asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop it, her voice small and fragile. His hand lifted from her arm, leaving her skin cold and empty for a moment. Her heart lurched. He's leaving. He's abandoning me too. But then his voice reached her again, quiet but certain, cutting through her panic. "I will guide you." Relief flooded her, so strong it nearly buckled her knees. She nodded fast, her voice breaking into a shaky thread. "Thank you. Please, I don't even know your name." "Caleb," he said, the word low and rumbling, like thunder rolling far off on the horizon. "Come, the night is long, and the land is unforgiving." He took her hand again, his grip steady and sure, pulling her forward into the dark. She stumbled after him, her boots catching on roots, slipping on wet stones, the ground uneven and rough beneath her. His warmth cut through the chill, radiating through his rough fingers into hers, a lifeline she clung to. Trusting a stranger felt strange, dangerous even, but the alternative was worse, being alone, lost to the wild, swallowed by the night. They moved in silence, step after step, the only sounds the crunch of wet leaves under their feet, the whisper of wind threading through the tall grass, the faint drip of water from the trees. Every so often, Caleb's hand tightened on hers, a silent signal to stop. She froze, holding her breath, straining her ears to hear what he did. Sometimes it was the snap of a twig, brittle and sharp, breaking under some unseen weight. Other times, it was the low, mournful cry of an owl. It's called drifting through the dark like a ghost. Her imagination twisted each sound into something deadly. Jaws snapping, claws scraping, eyes watching from the shadows she couldn't see. He pushed her hard, his pace steady and unrelenting, never slowing even when she stumbled. She knew she held him back. Her feet tangled in roots, her arms swung out awkwardly to keep her balance, her soaked dress dragging at her legs like a weight. She waited for him to snap, to growl at her slowness, to curse her for being a burden. But he didn't. His silence was patient, strong, a force as steady as the earth itself. Once, her toe snagged a hidden stone buried in the mud, and she pitched forward with a startled yelp, her hands flailing. His grip tightened instantly, pulling her upright before she could crash face first into the ground. "Careful," he said, his voice low and rough, edged with warning. "The earth is treacherous here." "I'm trying," she muttered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, her breath puffing out in quick bursts. He grunted, a short, sharp sound, and she thought she caught a flicker of amusement in it, though it was hard to tell. They kept going, the cold sinking deeper in her bones, her legs aching with every step, her muscles screaming for rest. When they finally stopped, she collapsed onto a patch of dry grass, her chest heaving, her hands pressing into the ground to steady herself. Caleb's footsteps faded for a moment, soft and deliberate, then returned. He pressed something in her hands, bread, rough and stale, its crust scratching her fingers. She clutched it, tearing into it with her teeth, the hunger in her stomach roaring louder than the storm ever had. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled by the bread, crumbs sticking to her lips. "For helping me." He didn't answer right away, and she chewed in silence, waiting. When he spoke, his voice was steady, carrying a hardness she couldn't quite place. "I help because I must. The wild takes without mercy." She swallowed hard, the bread lodging in her throat for a moment before going down. "Do you live out here alone?" she asked, her words careful, probing. Another pause, longer this time, thick with something unsaid. She could feel him weighing his answer, deciding how much to give. "For now," he said at last. "My people are far. I'll walk where I choose." His tone hid something, grief, maybe, or a quiet defiance. She wanted to ask more, to dig into the cracks of his words and find the story beneath, but she didn't. He'd saved her, pulled her from the mud and the dark. That was enough for now. "Thank you," she said again, softer, her voice barely reaching past her lips. He didn't reply, but his presence stayed close, a solid shadow beside her, a comfort she couldn't see but could feel deep in her chest. Morning came, the air sharp and cold, heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. They started walking again, her muscles stiff and sore, protesting every step. Caleb's grip on her arm never faltered, guiding her over rocks, around roots, through patches of thick grass that brushed against her legs. He began teaching her, his voice low and steady. Small things at first, lessons woven into their march. He showed her how to feel the wind's direction by the way it brushed her cheeks, cool and quick from one side, warm and slow from another. He taught her to smell water in the air, the faint dampness of moss clinging to stones. He pointed out the coolness near stream, the way the ground dipped slightly under her boots. Her senses stretched out, reaching for the world she couldn't see, grasping at every sound, every shift in the air. Her steps grew less clumsy, her feet finding their way over the uneven ground with less tripping, less falling. The wild, once a vast, terrifying unknown, started to take shape in her mind, Not safe, not friendly, but familiar, like a map she was learning to read. One evening, they stopped by a stream, its soft babbling a steady hum against the quiet of the night. She sat on the bank, her hands resting on the cool earth, feeling the faint vibration of the water moving nearby. Caleb's voice broke the stillness, low and sudden. "Why were you left behind?" The question hit her like a slap, sharp and unexpected, coiling tight around her chest until she could barely breathe. She flinched, her fingers digging into the dirt, scraping at the soil. "I wasn't. Not on purpose," she said, her voice raw, splintering as she spoke. "The storm was so loud, so fast. I got separated. They wouldn't leave me. They can't have." The words poured out, jagged and unsteady, a plea as much as an answer. His silence wasn't reassuring. It pressed against her, heavy and unyielding, like a wall she couldn't climb. "You don't believe they're looking for you," he said finally, his voice flat, cutting through her like a blade. The words burned, bitter and sharp, lodging in her throat. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking, breaking apart under the weight of the truth. "Maybe they tried. Maybe they looked and couldn't find me. Or maybe—" She stopped, her breath hitching, the thought too big, too awful to finish. Maybe it was easier to keep moving, to leave me behind. Her chest hollowed out, a cold, empty space where hope had flickered. Caleb shifted beside her, his warmth brushing her side as he settled closer. She could feel the heat of him, faint but steady, grounding her. "To be lost is to be forgotten," he said, his words sharp-edged but true, slicing into her. "But you are not forgotten. You are here. You endure." She frowned, her hands twisting in her lap, fingers knotting together. "Enduring isn't the same as being found," she said, her voice low, heavy with doubt. "No," he agreed, his tone softening just a little, a crack in his hardness. "But it's the beginning." The words stayed with her, restless and unsettling, buzzing in her mind like flies she couldn't swat away. But there was a truth in them she couldn't ignore. She was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. That had to mean something, didn't it? She clung to it, a tiny thread of strength in the dark. Days stretched on, each one a slow, grueling test. Caleb's lessons grew sharper, more urgent, his voice steady but insistent. He drilled her on sounds. How to tell the rustle of leaves from the shuffle of an animal. How to hear water trickling beneath the earth by the faint echo it carried. He taught her to feel the land, to notice the way it sloped or flattened, to smell the dampness that meant a stream was near. His patience was endless, a quiet force that never wavered. But his expectations were high, pushing her harder each day. Slowly, painfully, she rose to meet them, her senses sharpening, her body learning to trust what her eyes couldn't show her. One afternoon, the air turned thick and sour, heavy with a musk she didn't recognize, like meat left too long in the sun. Caleb's hand clamped on her wrist, hard and sudden, stopping her mid-step. "Don't move," he whispered, his breath close to her ear. "Listen." She held her breath, her heart slamming against her ribs, loud and fast. A boar snorted nearby, its breath rough and wet, its hooves thumping against the ground with a heavy, wild rhythm. She stood frozen, every muscle locked tight, waiting, listening, feeling the air shift as the beast moved. The sound faded, retreating into the distance, and Caleb loosened his grip, his fingers sliding away. "You heard it before I did," he said, a rare note of approval warming his voice. "I smelled it," she replied, her voice shaky but steadying, a flicker of pride rising in her chest. "Something sour like old meat." "Good," he said, firm and sure. "You're learning." The praise was small, but it lit something inside her, a warmth that spread through her chest, pushing back the cold. The next morning, he let her lead. He stayed close behind her, his footsteps soft, but near, a shadow ready to catch her if she fell. She moved slowly, sweat beading on her forehead, her nerves buzzing with every step. Her hands reached out, brushing grass, feeling for rocks, her ears straining for every sound. The wind, the birds, the crunch of her own boots. It was hard, exhausting, her legs trembling with the effort, but with each step, her confidence grew, small but steady, like a seed taking root. That night, they stopped under a twisted oak, its branches creaking softly in the breeze, groaning like an old man settling into sleep. Caleb built a small fire, its heat flickering against her skin, warming her hands as she held them out. She closed her eyes, feeling the faint dance of the flames against her lids, a rhythm she couldn't see but could sense. "Caleb," she asked, her voice soft, hesitant, "why are you helping me?" The silence stretched long and thick, so heavy she wondered if he'd heard her at all. She waited, the fire crackling between them, its pops and hisses filling the space. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, threaded with something raw, something that sounded like regret or sorrow, worn thin by time. "Once I left someone behind," he said, each word slow, heavy with pain. "Someone I should have protected. I can't change what was done, but I can keep you from sharing their fate." The fire's warmth faded against the chill his words brought, a cold that crept into her bones. She could hear the wound in his voice, fresh and unhealed, a scar he carried with him. She reached out, her fingers fumbling through the dark until they found his arm, rough and solid under her touch. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude, with something deeper she couldn't name. His hand covered hers, rough and calloused, but steady, strong, a silent promise. They sat there, the night pressing in around them, the fire's light a small defiance against the dark. The days grew hotter, the sun burning down through the trees, the air thick with the scent of parched earth and sharp pine. Ellie's steps became surer, her feet learning the land's secrets, where the roots hid, where the stones waited to trip her, where the ground softened into mud. Caleb eased back, letting her find her own way, though his presence never left her, a constant shadow at her back, watchful and unyielding. Their silence turned into something more, a bond, a trust forged through the hours, the miles, the shared weight of survival. The world stayed dark to her, a vast blackness she couldn't pierce, but it spoke in other ways now. She learned to read the brush of wind against her skin, the way it shifted and turned, carrying scents and sounds. She heard the rhythms of the wild, the chirp of insects, the flutter of birds, the distant howl of something bigger, something wilder. And most of all, she learned to read him, Caleb's steady breaths, the slight catch when he was tense, the quiet strength in his every move. Then one day his breathing changed, tightened, grew cautious like a string pulled too taut. His footsteps slowed, deliberate, careful. She stopped, her senses reaching out, questing through the air. Voices drifted on the wind, human voices faint at first, but growing louder, sharper, closer. Caleb's hand gripped her shoulder, his fingers curling and hard, an urgency in his touch that made her stomach drop. "Others come," he said, his voice low and sharp, cutting through the quiet. "They hunt." Her throat tightened, fear rising fast, choking her. "Oh," she asked, her voice small, trembling. "Men from your world," he said, his words bitter, spitting out like poison. "Not your kin. Greedy, afraid. Blood's been spilled where it shouldn't have been." His tone was hard, edged with something dark, something old. "What happened?" she pressed, her voice steadying despite the fear, needing to know. His silence was heavy, guarded, a wall she couldn't see past. "Long ago," he said finally, his voice cold and sharp, like a blade drawn slow, "settlers came. Took our land, cut down the trees, broke the earth. My people fought to keep what was ours. Blood fell, my family's blood. They help me now, call me outlaw, savage. It doesn't matter what they name me. They kill what they can't control. The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She understood now. His help wasn't just kindness, wasn't charity. It was defiance, a quiet rebellion against a world that had taken everything from him, just as it had torn her from her own. "Will they kill you?" she asked, the words trembling between them, fragile and afraid. "If they find us," he said, his tone flat, resigned but not broken. "They won't ask questions before they draw blood." Terror gripped her, cold and deep. Not of the wilderness anymore, not of the blind dark she'd always feared, but of these men, these hunters with no mercy, no reason. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice shaking but pushing forward. "We move faster," he said, his voice hardening, turning to steel. "We leave no trail. And when the time comes, we fight." Fight? The word echoed in her mind, heavy and impossible. She'd never been strong, never been the one to stand and face the world. She'd always been protected, shielded, pitted. But Caleb's resolve was unyielding, a fire that burned steady and fierce, and she felt it catch in her own chest, small but growing. They quickened their pace, moving through streams to mask their steps, weaving through dense thickets that scratched at her arms, her legs. He taught her to erase their tracks, brush away footprints, break twigs in the wrong direction. His breathing grew tight, ragged. Not fear for himself, she realized, but for her, a tension that sharpened his every word. For nights later, he led her to a cave, its entrance hidden by overgrown vines that brushed her face as they slipped inside. The air was cool, damp, the darkness absolute. A strange comfort to her now, a match for the blackness she'd always known. Caleb built a small fire, its heat modest but welcome, flickering against her hands as she held them out. She could feel him sitting beside her, his presence a solid wall against the fear creeping up her spine, slow and steady like a tide. "Will they find us?" she asked, her voice a thin thread, stretched tight. "If we're careless," he said, his tone clipped, fatigue seeping into the edges. She could hear it now, the weariness he'd hidden so well, breaking through. "We can't keep running forever," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them, raw and honest. "No," he admitted, his voice quieter, heavier. "But we can make them think we've gone another way. Confuse them, delay them." She sensed the strain in him, the way he fought to keep it buried, to stay strong for her. "I'm not a child," she said, her voice shaking but resolute, pushing back against the weight of his silence. "You don't have to protect me from the truth." There was a pause, long and still, the fire's crackle the only sound. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it, soft but strong. "You are stronger than you know, but strength doesn't make us invincible." She nodded, swallowing the knot of fear lodged in her throat, hard and bitter. He reached out then, his hand finding hers, pressing something in her palm, something cool, heavy, solid. A knife. Its blade was smooth, its edge sharp against her fingers, biting lightly when she tested it. "If the time comes," he said, his voice like iron, unyielding and cold, "you must be willing to do what's necessary." Her hands trembled as she tightened her grip around the handle, the weight of it sinking into her. The thought of using it, of cutting, of hurting, twisted her stomach, made her feel sick. But the alternative was worse, darker, final. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm despite the shake. "Good," he replied, a grim approval in his tone, a hardness that matched the blade. "Tomorrow, we make them believe we've gone west. They'll follow the trail, and when they do, we strike from the shadows." Her throat tightened, closing up around the fear, the doubt. She'd never held a weapon before, never imagined herself capable of violence, of blood. But the world she'd known was gone, torn away by the storm, by the men who hunted them now. And if she wanted to survive, she'd have to become something new, something fierce, something sharp. She gripped the knife closer, feeling its cold metal against her skin, its weight a promise, a burden. "Will you leave me?" she asked suddenly, the question bursting out, sharp and desperate, cutting through the quiet. "No," he said, his voice steady, solid, a vow carved into the air between them. "We are bound now, by blood, by loss. I will not leave you." His words settled deep inside her, heavy and warm, a foundation she could build on, a rock to cling to in the storm of what was coming. Whatever lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone, wouldn't face it helpless. The night pressed in around them, thick and heavy, but Ellie held fast to the knife, its blade a silent oath they wouldn't run forever. The fight would come, and she'd be ready. Subscribe now for more gripping tales of survival, where the lost fight to claim the dark.